Hello everyone, welcome to my little presentation about my preschool comprehension study. My name is Mariah Newman and here is my research study. First I want to discuss a little bit how my research question has evolved and how the focus has evolved as I've tested out the research questions and reconsidered logistics. So my research study began as an attention study for my read aloud sessions. I work with a variety of preschoolers. I'll get into the logistics of their needs in the next few slides. However, I wanted to increase the attention that they were providing and they were giving during my read aloud sessions. So I wanted to measure whole class read aloud attention. And so the issues with this was, how does one study attention? As I was talking to my SP, I was thinking, well, eye contact seems to be a measure of attention and orienting your body towards the speaker, but then we were thinking about ourselves and we were thinking, well, in terms of my own life, sometimes I'm paying attention and comprehending material, but not looking directly towards the screen or towards the person talking at every moment. So is eye contact and even orienting towards the speaker a concrete measure of attention? And then my attention study started to become a comprehension study. So what are they actually comprehending? Whether they're attending or whether they're orienting their bodies towards the person speaking, what are they actually comprehending? So my research question became, how do I increase student comprehension during my whole class read aloud sessions? The rationale for this research question bloomed in the environment that I was in. So I'm a co-teacher in an integrated preschool. I'm a teaching fellow this year, and I've had the opportunity to teach every other week since October, full lead teach. I teach students 3 to 5 years old. I teach students with communication disorders, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, and developmental delays. So I noticed in some of my read aloud sessions that I had some students that weren't comprehending the questions that I were asking them, and they weren't comprehending the stories that we were reading. And I wondered how I can increase that comprehension through strategies that I use or through other means. So I kind of honed in on two specific students. So student A is one of my students. He's a male. He's 4 years old. He's been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. I noticed a sort of lack of comprehension in some of my read aloud sessions that I suspect might be due to attention issues or lack of interest. Student B is a female. I have her 5 days a week, whereas student A I have only 3 days a week. So student B is a female. She's 5 years old. She's been diagnosed with developmental delay. I noticed a lack of attention that might result from a lack of comprehension. The two could be very connected. Regardless, I wanted to try, I know student B is going to preschool next year, so I wanted to try and to amp up the amount that she comprehends when I read a story to them. So I wanted to find ways to increase their comprehension. So a summary of how I collected my data. I basically collected my data bi-weekly. So twice a week, I would have my students. I did it, and these students are both from the same class. I have 2 different classes. This was the Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. I created data collection sheets specific to each student. I would prepare questions prior to each read aloud that were tailored to their specific needs and levels of understanding. I first took baseline data where I incorporated no read aloud strategies like no visuals, no acting, no having a student turn the pages for me, etc., etc. Intervention data. I then incorporated read aloud strategies and measured students' comprehension by asking them simple comprehension questions. So I'm going to show you, this is an example of the data collection sheets that I utilized. So I would write the date on it. I would write what nonfiction or fiction text I was using, if I was incorporating a read aloud strategy, and the initials of the student. I would prepare 2 questions per each read aloud per each student. And then whether the student accurately responded, I would write yes or no, and was the student given choices. So, for example, in question 1, did the rain stop? And they didn't answer, I would say, did it stop or did it keep going? And then, but in this example, my student was able to answer both questions accurately without any choices given. So I used a mixture of nonfiction and fiction texts in my read alouds, in my comprehension study, and in my read alouds. It took me some time to think about what is a comprehension question that I want students to master. So what type of questions do I want students to be able to understand at the age of 4 and 5? And I decided on some simple questions such as, who's in the book? What happened in the book? Where did it happen? Where are they? Where are the characters? And how did it happen? And the how questions I was hesitant to utilize, mostly because I felt they might be too complex, but I did end up using them a few times. Some of the books I used were Rain by Sam Usher and the famous Rainbow Fish by Marcus Pfister. Book selection, I selected half fiction and half non-fiction text to try and incorporate an even spread. I took some baseline data. The first book I read was Rain by Sam Usher, and I didn't incorporate any read aloud strategies in this read aloud. Turns out students got the correct answer, got answers correct 100% of the time during this read aloud, and I was really pleasantly surprised, and I thought a lot about this and about why this could have been, and perhaps simpler is better, less strategies incorporated is better. I would have to take a little more data to finalize that conclusion, but that is one of the things we'll talk about in a few slides. Data with read aloud strategies. Students got, you can't, unfortunately the screen is cutting off, Screentastic is cutting off correct answer and incorrect answer, but 75% of the time their answers were incorrect with the read aloud strategies I incorporated, and only 25% of the time they were correct. So I did a lot of thinking, what is causing this? Am my strategies not effective? Are my strategies too distracting? So I'm going to theorize that with you in a little bit. So trends. I did notice a trend that students answered comprehension questions correctly when they were not given props, fidgets, or objects to hold in their hands. And that is what I'm talking about with the distractions. So I know as teachers sometimes we want to always add more to the lessons, add more to the read alouds. But in this case, it seemed to detract from their comprehension when students were given a prop or something to fidget with during the read aloud. For example, during my Rainbow Fish read aloud, I gave one student shiny scales to give away as we read the story and reenacted how the rainbow fish gave away his scale. So it's sort of acting comprehension study. Now, students were not only more distracted, but they were less accurate in their answers to my comprehension questions. So that made me think, does incorporating visuals or other props during read aloud strategies actually detract from comprehension? And had I continued with this data, then I might have been able to come to a definitive conclusion that yes, that is true, that it does detract from comprehension. Some patterns. Students answered the simpler comprehension questions correctly over all trials, which is something I could have predicted, but that is what the data showed. And the less visuals involved during the read aloud, the less comprehension questions, the more comprehension questions were answered correctly. So basically, the less distraction students have, the more likely they were to answer comprehension questions correctly. Now, some outliers. One of the strategies I implemented was during the read aloud, I showed the book being read over YouTube. And the results that I found were that one of my students was very focused and the other student was not and could not attend to the story, let alone answer the comprehension questions accompanied with it. So this tells me, I think it's safe to assume that technology can be an asset for some students, but not for others. Strategies I did end up implementing with my short time frame that we were all given. I use props, I use visuals, I use reenacting and acting, and I use YouTube read alouds. I felt as though the visuals used prior to the read aloud, as in before when I activated prior knowledge, were most successful, but props and visuals used during were least successful in aiding comprehension. These are the strategies I would have implemented had I had more time to collect data due to the school shutdowns. I would have activated prior knowledge before more than once to find out if that really has an effect on comprehension, because it seems as though it does. It's just I don't have quite it. I project that it would, but I can't say definitively that it would. Rereading the story multiple times, I've done this a lot with my students, and it does seem to have a positive effect in comprehension, from what I've found. So I would be interested to measure that a little closer. Having the students turn the pages for me was another strategy that I found interesting, especially for my students who have trouble attending. And having students repeat the words on the page back to me once I say them to the students. Perhaps that would increase comprehension as well. So if I do this study in the future, or just in my future teaching, I will definitely incorporate these strategies to see if they work. Projections for the completion of data. If the data had kept unfolding the way it was unfolding, I think we would have seen a trend that the less visuals or other distractions present during the story, though they were impeding comprehension. And the key word here is during. The visuals prior to or after the story that activated prior knowledge and summarized the story most likely would have aided comprehension. So having the least amount of distractions during the read aloud, I think, is essential in aiding comprehension. However, visuals prior to or after the story, I do think aid comprehension. It's just a matter of when you utilize them. What I learned from this process, the big takeaways: less is more during read aloud. So the less distractions you have in terms of background noise, preferential seating, classroom setup, visuals, the more students can comprehend. I do think simpler comprehension questions help students build their skills to eventually answer more challenging ones, and I was noticing that as I was moving through the books that I read to students. Technology is not always the answer. Some students, it does increase focus and comprehension, and others, it simply does not. And then, as I've been discussing, minimizing distractions during the read alouds. Impact on this is what I've been, having some impact on my future teaching and my growth as a teacher. So as I move forward, while I plan these lessons, I want to focus on minimizing the amount of materials that are present during a read aloud and consequently in all lessons. I find that with the students I work with the ADHD, less is more in terms of the amount of materials on their desk and throughout their lessons. Preferential seating should be definitely considered, and visuals and other materials will be utilized before or following the read aloud instead of during. And due to lack of data, I will continue to test these theories when we eventually return to school. Thank you so much for listening to my read aloud study, and I look forward to hearing all of yours.